This morning, you probably woke up in the dark. You reached for your phone before you reached for the window. Your room stayed dim, your curtains stayed shut, and your brain stayed confused. That feels normal to you. But the real answer is far stranger. Thousands of years ago, your ancestors built entire stone structures so that this exact moment, the moment of waking, could never happen the way it happens to you. Walk into almost any ancient Indian temple, and you will notice something. The main entrance faces east. Not most of the time, almost always. Tourists call it tradition. Guides call it religion. But why east? Why not north, where the cool air comes from? Why not west, where the sunsets are dramatic and golden? There is a reason, and it has very little to do with worship and everything to do with your body. Picture the Sun Temple at Konark, on the eastern coast of India. It was built in the 13th century, shaped like a giant stone chariot with 24 wheels, each one large enough for a person to stand inside. The temple was designed so that the first rays of the rising sun would strike the main deity directly, lighting up the inner sanctum like a switch being flipped. Engineers today still study how precisely it was aligned. How did builders with no satellites, no computers, and no modern instruments manage this level of accuracy? Konark wasn't an isolated case either. The Modhera Sun Temple in Gujarat was built so that on the equinoxes, sunlight travels straight through the main entrance and lands precisely on the central idol, with no shadow in between. 2 equinoxes a year. Same result, every time, for almost 1,000 years. That's not an accident you stumble into. That's a calculation you repeat, check, and repeat again until it's perfect. The answer starts with the sky. Ancient Indian astronomers were obsessive about the sun's movement. They tracked the solstices, the equinoxes, the exact angle of sunrise across the seasons. Researcher Subhash Kak, who has spent decades studying Vedic astronomy, has argued that many ancient Indian temples and altars were laid out using precise astronomical calculations, not guesswork. The orientation wasn't symbolic. It was measured. It was engineered. Now here's where it gets strange. Why would a civilization spend generations perfecting sunrise alignment for a building? Why does it matter if light hits a statue at dawn? Because light was never really about the statue. It was about you. Your body runs on an internal clock. Scientists call it the circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour cycle that controls when you feel awake, when you feel sleepy, when your body releases hormones, and even when your digestion kicks into gear. This clock sits in a tiny cluster of brain cells just above where your optic nerves cross. And it has one main job. It waits for light. Specifically, it waits for a certain kind of light. Cool, blue-toned, early morning light. The kind that only exists for a short window after sunrise. Here's what that light actually does inside you. When morning light hits the back of your eye, it sends a signal to that small cluster of brain cells, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That cluster then tells the rest of your body what time it is. It tells your adrenal glands to release cortisol, the hormone that gives you a natural sense of alertness. It tells your pineal gland to stop producing melatonin, the hormone that was keeping you asleep. Within minutes of the right kind of light hitting your eyes, your entire internal chemistry shifts from night mode to day mode. Without that signal, the shift happens late, or weakly, or not at all. And your body doesn't just shrug it off, it runs the rest of the day slightly out of sync, like an orchestra where one section started half a beat behind everyone else. Sleep researcher Russell Foster at Oxford has spent years studying how light exposure shapes human alertness, mood, and even long-term health. His work shows that getting bright light early in the day helps set your internal clock correctly. Miss that window, and your whole day can drift. Your energy dips at the wrong times. Your sleep that night gets worse. Repeat that pattern for years, and the effects start showing up everywhere, from your mood to your metabolism. Now imagine a society that didn't have phones, didn't have artificial light, and didn't have alarm clocks, but also didn't fully understand hormones, brain chemistry, or the concept of a circadian rhythm. How would they encourage an entire population to step outside, face the rising sun, and absorb that morning light every single day, without fail? You make it sacred, you make it a ritual. You build a giant structure that channels the sunrise directly onto something the community considers holy, and you tell everyone that standing in that light, at that hour, is an act of devotion. It worked. For centuries, communities gathered at dawn, faced east, and stood in that exact light their bodies needed. They called it worship. Their internal clocks called it medicine. This wasn't limited to grand temples either. Vastu Shastra, the ancient Indian system of architecture, repeatedly emphasizes east-facing entrances and windows for homes, not just temples. The texts describe it in terms of energy, auspiciousness, and balance. But notice the pattern. East-facing homes receive that same early morning light directly into living spaces every single day, automatically, just by design. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. A study led by sleep scientist Kenneth Wright at the University of Colorado took modern people, the kind who scroll on phones late at night and sleep in dark curtained rooms, and sent them camping for a week with zero artificial light. No phones, no screens, just sunrise and sunset. Within days, their internal clocks shifted dramatically. Their sleep improved. Their hormone timing realigned with the actual sun. It took less than a week of natural light exposure to undo years of modern disruption. Your ancestors didn't need a research grant to discover this. They built it into the walls. Think about that gap for a second. Ancient builders, working with ropes, shadows, and centuries of patient observation, encoded a health intervention into architecture and called it religion. Modern researchers working with brain scans and lab equipment are rediscovering the exact same intervention and calling it a treatment for circadian disorders. Who's ahead here? Genuinely. There's something else worth noticing. The east-facing design wasn't just about light intensity, it was about timing. Sunrise light is different from midday light. It's softer, cooler in color temperature, lower in intensity, and it arrives gradually. Your eyes and brain respond to this gradual increase differently than they respond to suddenly flipping on a bright bulb at 7 a.m. A gradual sunrise tells your body, gently, that the day is beginning. A sudden artificial light tells your body almost nothing, except that something bright just happened. So when a temple was angled to catch that first gentle light and let it spill slowly across a stone floor, illuminating a deity's face inch by inch as the sun climbed, that wasn't just visually beautiful, it was biologically precise. It mimicked the exact light curve your circadian system evolved to expect. Now think about your own mornings. Phone screen first, curtains drawn. Maybe an alarm that jolts you awake in artificial light, or worse, in darkness. Your body receives almost none of the signals it was designed around. No gradual light, no directional cue from the sun, no ritual that gets you outside facing east in that first hour. Modern life didn't remove this need. It just removed the architecture that used to meet it automatically. Think about how many decisions stand between you and that morning light now. Your curtains are thick because you want to sleep in on weekends. Your bedroom faces whichever direction the building happened to be constructed because nobody designing apartment blocks today is thinking about your suprachiasmatic nucleus. Your first conscious act of the day is often a screen, glowing at a brightness your eyes were never designed to process before sunrise. Every single one of these choices, harmless on its own, quietly removes you further from the system your ancestors built entire cities around. And it's not just about feeling tired. Researchers studying shift workers, people whose schedules constantly fight against natural light cycles, have found links between disrupted circadian rhythms and higher rates of metabolic issues, mood disorders, and weakened immune responses. Your body isn't being dramatic when it feels off after a string of dark mornings and late nights staring at screens. It's responding exactly the way it evolved to respond to a world that no longer sends it the right signals. Here's the twist, though. You don't need a 13th century stone temple with 24 carved wheels to fix this. You need about 10 minutes. Stepping outside shortly after sunrise, facing roughly east with no sunglasses, lets that same light hit your eyes the way it hit your ancestors standing in temple courtyards. Your internal clock doesn't know the difference between sacred architecture and your apartment balcony. It just responds to light. Maybe that's the real reframe here. The ancient builders weren't primitive people guessing at the universe. They were precise observers who didn't have the vocabulary of biology, so they used the vocabulary of devotion instead. East became sacred not because the sun was a god, but because the sun was, quite literally, medicine, and devotion was the delivery mechanism that made sure nobody skipped their dose. There's a kind of humility in that, if you sit with it. A civilization without microscopes, without brain scans, without a single word for hormone, still managed to build a system that got the right light to the right people at the right time, every single day, for over 1,000 years. They didn't need to understand the mechanism. They only needed to notice what worked, and then make it impossible to ignore. You, on the other hand, understand the mechanism completely. You could explain cortisol and melatonin to a stranger if you had to, and yet most mornings you still wake up in the dark, reach for a screen, and let the sun rise unnoticed outside a curtain you haven't opened in years. Knowledge didn't make this easier. If anything, it made it easier to ignore, because nothing forces you to act on it. No temple bell rings at dawn in your apartment. No carved stone chariot points your bed toward the horizon. The structure that used to do this work for you is gone, and nothing has replaced it except a notification that tells you to get up, often in light far dimmer and far less useful than the one waiting just outside. So tomorrow morning, when you wake up in the dark and reach for your phone, ask yourself something. Are you missing a notification? Or are you missing a ritual your ancestors considered too important to leave to chance?